The government of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela represents one of the most complex and controversial geopolitical issues of our time. Its nature is the subject of heated and polarized international debate. The Venezuelan regime is often labeled with strong terms like tyranny or dictatorship. These labels reflect a widespread perception of its administration of power. To fully understand the Venezuelan reality, a thorough and multidimensional analysis is essential. We must examine the historical, economic, and political context that shaped its evolution. Nicolas Maduro's rise to power is inextricably linked to the charismatic figure of Hugo Chavez. Maduro assumed the presidency in 2013 following the death of his predecessor. Chavez had inaugurated the so called Bolivarian Revolution, an ambitious political and social project. This movement aimed to radically transform Venezuelan society. Chavez's policies were deeply rooted in socialist principles. They envisioned a central role for the state in the country's economy and social life. One of the primary objectives was a significant redistribution of national wealth. This was achieved through nationalizations and public spending programs. There was a significant increase in social programs aimed at improving the living conditions of the poorest segments of the population. Access to essential services was expanded. However, Chavez's economic strategy created a heavy dependence on oil. Venezuela, with its immense reserves, relied almost entirely on crude oil exports. This economic monoculture made the country extremely vulnerable. Fluctuations in oil prices on the international market could have devastating effects. The Maduro government inherited an economy that was already structurally fragile and dependent. The foundations laid by Chavez proved insufficient to withstand external shocks. The collapse in oil prices, which began in 2014, proved to be a key and devastating factor. It drained government revenues essential for funding social programs. Added to this was widespread and systemic corruption, which further eroded public resources. Development funds were often diverted or mismanaged. Economic mismanagement was another crucial factor in the decline. Poor political decisions exacerbated the crisis rather than mitigating it. Price control policies, implemented to contain inflation, had counterproductive effects. They discouraged domestic production and created black markets. The consequence of these factors was a severe and prolonged economic crisis. Venezuela fell into a recession unprecedented in its modern history. Inflation reached hyperbolic levels, rendering the purchasing power of money almost zero. Life savings were wiped out in a matter of months. There was widespread shortage of basic necessities from food to medicines. Supermarkets and pharmacies were often empty. This scenario has led to a drastic increase in poverty. Millions of Venezuelans have slipped below the subsistence level, facing hunger and disease. Alongside the economic crisis, the Maduro government has shown a clear authoritarian drift. Accusations of human rights violations have multiplied. Elections, both presidential and legislative, have often been contested for irregularities. The lack of transparency has undermined their legitimacy in the eyes of the international community. There has been systematic persecution of political opposition. Critical voices have been silenced by various means. Arbitrary arrests, forced exiles, and intimidation have become common tools against opponents. Many political leaders have been forced to flee the country. Freedom of the press has been drastically restricted. The government has exercised ever greater control over the media. Numerous independent media outlets have been shut down or forced to cease operations. Censorship has become widespread, limiting access to unrelated information. The judiciary was progressively subordinated to the government. Court decisions were often perceived as influenced by the executive. This subordination has undermined the independence of the judiciary. The separation of powers, a cornerstone of any democracy, has been severely compromised. The Maduro government's actions, particularly its political repression and authoritarian rule, have led many to characterize the regime as a tyranny or a dictatorship. These terms are not used randomly. They imply autocratic government where power is concentrated in the hands of a single individual or a small group. The will of the people is ignored or manipulated. Suppression of opposition is a hallmark of such regimes. Any form of dissent is crushed, often by force. The lack of civil and political liberties is another crucial indicator. Citizens do not enjoy the fundamental rights guaranteed in democracies. The concentration of power without checks and balances is the basis of every dictatorial system. Democratic institutions are emptied of meaning. The situation in Venezuela has raised deep international concern. Many countries and organizations have condemned the actions of the Maduro government. In response, economic sanctions have been imposed by key actors such as the United States and the European Union. These are aimed at putting pressure on the regime. The sanctions have hit vital sectors of the Venezuelan economy, particularly the oil sector. They have significantly impacted the government's ability to operate. International accusations of human rights violations and corruption have been formalized. Supranational bodies have expressed serious concerns. The International Criminal Court has opened a preliminary investigation into alleged crimes against humanity committed in Venezuela. This underscores the gravity of the situation. The international community is divided between those who recognize Maduro as the legitimate president and those who support the opposition. This polarization complicates any solution. The Maduro government is characterized by a severe economic crisis and a progressive authoritarian drift. These two factors have fed off each other, creating a vicious cycle. Allegations of human rights violations are pervasive and well documented by international organizations. Repression has become a constant. The country's governance has led to profound political and social instability. Millions of Venezuelans have been forced to emigrate, generating a regional humanitarian crisis. The term tyranny or dictatorship is considered appropriate by many analysts to describe the nature of the regime. Its actions clearly reflect these characteristics. The situation remains complex and constantly evolving, with intertwined internal and external dynamics. There is no simple or immediate solution. The implications are significant both for the Venezuelan population, who suffer daily, and for the international community, which seeks a balance between intervention and non interference. Understanding Maduro's Venezuela requires a critical and informed analysis that goes beyond simplifications. Only then can we hope to grasp the depth of this political and human tragedy.